This segment you are about to listen to is a snippet from my book, The Flat Earth Manifesto, which is currently in the process of being written. God willing, this book will be the most comprehensive treatise ever written on the subject of flat Earth when it is complete. It will touch on many topics: the science, the historical documentation, the philosophy, the scriptural support for the flat Earth, and the history of space as an industry, just to name a few. If you are interested in learning more, subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more updates about the book. Peace and God bless. All right, peace to you, ladies and gentlemen. So, in this section of the book that I'm reading, it's called The History of the Globe. And one of the previous pieces of my book that I put up not too long ago was I talked about the history of the flat Earth. Where does the flat Earth model find its genesis? And of course, the flat Earth model finds its genesis. It was the first model ever given to mankind. It was the model of the world that was taught to Adam, the first man, and it was passed down through the ages. And all of the ancient religious scriptures, all of the holy texts, all of them, they all talk and describe a flat Earth. This was the common standard model of the world that the ancient civilizations believed in. So that is where the flat Earth comes from. It ultimately comes from God, the scriptures, the first man, Adam, that it was given to him, and then it was passed down through the ages of all the various holy books around the world. Now, I'm talking about where the globe comes from. Now, a lot of us are under the impression, or we're given the myth, that the globe came from like empirical observation, scientific studies, just like hardcore, rigorous analysis. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I prove that all in this section on the history of the globe. Where does the globe come from? It comes from the mystical schools of Pythagoras, Plato, and Parmenides. And I don't know how familiar you are with Greek philosophy. Perhaps getting a little bit familiar with that would give you, some context to what I'm reading to you. But essentially, I describe what kind of mindset has been interested in and promoted the globe. Now, for those of you who don't know, Pythagoras, Parmenides, Plato, these were not hardcore empirical physical scientists, okay? Pythagoras believed in divine mathematics. Plato believed in the doctrine of the forms, these like divine heavenly forms, these archetypes, which all things in matter, all things in the physical world, they're like pale, shadowy reflections of the upper world. And Parmenides believed in this ridiculous concept of the absolute one, the monad, which there's no distinction between place and time. Everything is just the absolute. All distinctions that we see in the world are purely illusory. These were metaphysicians. Metaphysicians are the kinds of people that have made the globe model. Now, like I said, we are given the idea by modern scientists that, the globe model that came out of empirical study and observation. No, 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 no. This model comes out of the schools of Plato and Pythagoras and Parmenides, metaphysicians, mental masturbators. And for those of you who don't know, mental masturbation is basically people who engage in very intellectually stimulating conversation which has no fruit. These are men who are the furthest thing from scientists. They are philosophers. This whole idea of the globe, it comes from metaphysics and philosophy and theology. That's all it's ever been. And I go to explain that and prove that in this book, or in this particular section of the book. And I'm going to read to you a certain part of it right now. So I'm going to describe the mindset of this kind of person who is interested in the globe and has promoted the globe historically. Once again, not scientists at all. Plato, Pythagoras, and Parmenides were not scientists. So we begin the reading. Hitherto, we have expanded upon the history of the flat Earth model, i.e., a conception of the Earth as an extended plane, with successive hardened coverings over top of it known as a firmament of heaven, all formed as an act of divine creation by God Almighty. This sealed, intelligently designed, planar Earth was the standard model of creation for every single major human civilization. The most technologically advanced, studious people to ever live, that themselves have set the foundations for the current technological revolution we see blossoming today, all subscribe to such an understanding of the cosmos. Aside from this model being a revelation of the Most High to the first man, Adam, and the subsequent prophets afterwards, generally speaking, the kinds of men who have produced and expanded upon flat Earth models of the universe were fairly practical, pragmatic physical scientists. That is why the flat Earth model was a belief of essentially the whole of the ancient world. It wasn't hard for people to grasp because it matched their senses. And this goes back to the section which I read where I proved Utterly, utterly. I haven't put all of that evidence, obviously, on YouTube because there's so much to go through. But there is a section where I show that this was a standard model of creation, and I've read an excerpt from it. But continuing on. So, if not only God himself, but also pragmatic physical scientists who try to seek out the most plausible explanation for a natural phenomenon are the kinds of individuals who have detailed a flat earth model of creation, then what kind of men have produced the globe model? From what mindset has a spherical universe been born out of? In other words, what is the history of the globe? It is this question which I will seek to address in the following pages. It is a myth that persists in our culture that the current paradigm of life, including its cosmology, has been arrived upon by means of rigorous empirical analysis, almost like the various competing theories produced by the whole world regarding everything that exists has all been tossed into a strainer of truth by the scientists, shaken violently, and only the doctrines of modernity remained. That our contemporary belief system has been built upon the facts and the facts alone. This sentiment people seem to hold so dearly is totally illusory, based in nothing but fiction. How people view the world today is so far divorced from any rational analysis that it is practically sinful when they call the scripturalist religious in the sense that most mean it, where they imply that all of our beliefs are purely based on blind faith, superstition, and hocus pocus magic, and the modernists they call quote unquote scientific. That is totally backwards. The scripturalists, to people like you and me who believe the Quran, our beliefs are in fact the postulations that are absolutely demonstrable in the real world. Whereas the planks of modernity, on the other hand, are blind, superstitious, and based on hocus pocus magic. So, like I said, the big myth today is that the globe and all the modern doctrines of science, it comes from rigorous analysis. They're all big on that. They're like, oh, we're empiricists, we're physicalists, we only care about the raw facts, facts before feelings. We're the hardcore scientists. No, 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 no. This globe model is anything but scientific. It comes from mystics and lunatics in the ancient world like Pythagoras, Plato, and Parmenides. So, continuing forward. It is a baseless belief to think that the majority of people in this world are somehow qualified to decide on how the world should be run, because in reality, most people are unstudied, untempered, and objectively useless. Yet the modernist upholds democracy as the most righteous standard of governance. It is a baseless belief to think that men and women are equal, considering the obvious differences in biology, mentality, and behavior within these two genders, yet the modernist maintains women are every bit as capable as a man in all pursuits. It is a baseless belief to think that sodomy is natural, because everyone knows it is obviously not based in any practical reproductive instinct, yet the modernist stands with the conviction behind the idea that sodomy is every bit as normal as a husband laying with his wife. It is a baseless belief to think that monkeys and mankind have a common ancestor, because it is evident in even the most cursory analysis that these are two entirely different types of creation in terms of appearance, physical constitution, and mental capacity, yet the modernist firmly believes that he hails from primates. It is a baseless belief to think that a mother killing her unborn child is not murder, because certainly that life forming within her belly is another perfectly innocent human being who will, in due time, by God's leave, become fully potentialized. Yet the modernist fights for the quote-unquote right of the mother to commit first-degree murder against her own unborn child, and labels it instead as a quote-unquote medical procedure. So right now, I'm laying out how all of these kind of modernist planks and doctrine and how it has nothing to do with physical observation. So continuing on. Although the Matrix worships science, sanctifies empiricism, and prostrates before the concept of demonstrability in appearance, the Matrix nevertheless profanes its own core postulates at every turn. Nothing, and I repeat, nothing about the dogmas which it holds to be absolute fact have anything to do with an empirical observation of any kind. It is all conjecture, theory, and speculation. What kind of people are able to, quote unquote, make sense of all of this madness? Is it the common person? No. The common person does not learn by way of logical proposition or making sense of things, but instead by indoctrination and osmosis. So who irons out the obvious wrinkles in these theories? It is delusional academics who have a lot of intellect but no wisdom, and apparently no eyeballs or the ability to see what is obvious, who conjure up complex, convoluted theories to make it all quote unquote work out, which no man or woman seems to understand except for them, or their other equally delusional academic colleagues. So now I'm going to get into describing the mindset of this type of person who has come up with the globe and all these modernist theories, what he's like. Democracy does not make sense to the eyes because the eyes can see that some people were born to lead and other people were just born to follow without any say in the matter. Yet it makes sense in the head of the quote-unquote political scientist who strings up a web of mental gibberish to make it work. The equality of men and women does not make sense to the eyes because the eyes can see the clear limitation God has placed in women relative to men. Yet the quote-unquote social scientist makes sense of it all within his or her head with a bunch of ridiculous theories on how gender roles are somehow a result of years of environmental conditioning, both biological and cultural, that impart certain characteristics into people, not anything within an innate within the individual. So this is getting into behaviorism, evolutionary biology, the whole idea of the tabula rasa. The social scientists, they believe that, women are the way they are, not because of a nature God has put in them, certain limitations, physical, mental limitations. They're not as intelligent or rational or as logical as men are in the majority. They're not as strong as a man physically. They think this is all because of years of evolutionary characteristics they have adopted because of their being oppressed by man. And this is not innate within them. It's not nature, it's nurture, it's the environment that has imparted these abilities onto them, or these lack of abilities onto them. And this is another theory they have, which is behaviorism, evolutionary biology, and it's nonsense. Continuing on, sodomy does not compute to the eyes because the eyes can see that it is obvious filth, yet it makes sense to the sexologist, etc. You understand the point. Of course, I am not denigrating true intelligence or condemning any particular field of study, sexology notwithstanding, because only perverts would choose such a discipline to make their career. I am not an anti-intellectual. One of the main problems in the modern world, I think, is the fact that because of instant gratification, fast-paced, high-impact content on our smartphone from things like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube Shorts, a lot of people just do not seem to be able to follow an argument or read a book, which definitely has to do with the reduced level of intellect caused by this overstimulation. I love intellect. I am exercising mine right now as I write this book, and you, my honored reader, will be exercising yours when reading it and considering the content between its pages. I do not suggest at all that mankind regress backwards into a state of mind where they do not think about things deeply or any profound way. People already have their drug and alcohol addictions for that, which usually does not work too well for them. What I am describing to you, this is key here, okay? This is key. What I am describing to you is a certain character, a particular type of person who finds asylum in the West for his otherwise failed life. The West gives this person an environment to let his imagination run wild, and even funds his rather derelict life. My criticisms are not addressed towards true, holistic intelligence, but a type of man which I will call here the castrated intellectual. So this is who I'm describing. This is the guy, whether we're talking about Plato, Pythagoras, Parmenides, we're talking about the people in university nowadays. This is the person who has historically promoted the globe, stood up for the globe, made up the theories that have propped up the globe. I call him the castrated intellectual, and I'm going to describe how he is. So continuing with the reading. What kind of man is the castrated intellectual? He is one who derives much amusement from quote-unquote intellectual pursuits, despite not having any real wisdom or interest in attaining wisdom. You will find the castrated intellectual in both secular universities and religious seminary schools, where he pursues disciplines like either philosophy, sociology, political science, or even theology in the case of the seminary student, not for achieving practical knowledge which he will then apply in his life, but simply for mental stimulation. The castrated intellectual may listen to lectures, read books, or know a lot of fancy terminology, but whatever knowledge he has gained from these studies is relatively impotent. Academics are a source of entertainment for him that keeps his wild imagination occupied and makes him feel smart. However, if you look at the rest of his life, he is a total loser. He is often a sexual failure and perpetually single, not by his own choice, but by women's choice, or if he is married, it's usually to some out-of-line feminist wife who wears the pants in the relationship and controls him, whom he simply pays the bills for. He is also weak, either scrawny or morbidly obese, due to the lack of exercise and a poor diet, pasty in complexion from avoiding the sun and being in front of a computer all day, possesses no social skills, and has horrible posture due to the neglect of his physical constitution for years. He also regularly takes pills, supplements, and other magic potions prescribed by his equally weak doctor that act as a crutch for his overall pathetic lifestyle, which is causing his body to fail him. These castrated intellectual types also live relatively comfortable lives, inclining towards safety in the path of least resistance. Courageousness, heroism, and exceptionalism are not virtues that he strives towards. He is a middling man, caught up in the mundane and the contrived, exceptional in neither talent nor intention. That intellect of his that he is so proud of, filled with dates, ideas, events, and historical people he knows lots of trivia on but understands nothing about, does not take him very far, but in fact fails as soon as the going gets roughed and is dropped at the first sign of trouble, where instead his cowardice and lizard brain take over. You will as well notice that this type of man, i.e., the castrated intellectual, also usually has no definable, time-tested historical creed with which he aligns himself. Almost always he is atheistic, relativistic, and highly secular, waddling about life with no guidance from the many wise men who have existed in times past. His actions remain untempered, unrooted, confused, and without context. He is an empty shell of a man, not connected to anything profound that has withstood the tests of time. A true modernist in every sense of the word. One who knows so much about everything, probably able to do fairly well on a world religions trivia test, knowing of histories, dates, doctrines, holy sites, sects, and important figures, but yet at the same time knows so little about anything, not having personally experienced the wealth of wisdom contained in any one of these transcendental traditions from the ancient world that comes from sincerely adhering to its creed for any lengthy period of time. So he's not interested in actually becoming a Muslim or, let's say, becoming a Christian. And I know obviously there are problems within Christianity and all that kind of stuff, but there is wisdom in it as well. Insofar as Christianity resembles a tremendous tradition, resembles what the Quran teaches, resembles the belief in one God, the keeping of his commandments, there is definitely wisdom that is collected over the years in Christianity and Judaism, but the castrated intellectual does not follow any of these. He doesn't hold himself to any time-tested principles. So continuing on. He idea shops, flirts with religion and philosophy, and tickles his imagination, not possessing the courage to exercise faith and adopt one into his own life. He is a so-called expert in the field, but somehow forgets the entire purpose of religion and philosophy, which isn't to sound smart or seek amusement through idle chit-chat about inconsequential particulars, but instead the reason for their existence is to make men better. Truly powerful creeds are not just for intellectually stimulating conversation. It is meant to be personalized, adopted, practiced, and miraculously transformative within the individual's life. Or, if he does so happen to profess some ancient creed like Islam or Christianity, which is not often, it is only nominal. Much like the mass of men, he too may say with his tongue that he is this or that. So he may say he is a Christian or a Muslim. But his overall lifestyle, which is a true indicator of what a man follows in his heart of hearts, is very secular. He consistently consumes rubbish in both food and entertainment, drawing not even one bit in his own life from the repository of knowledge contained within the historical tradition he claims to follow. And interjecting again, there's a great repository of knowledge within the Catholic Church. There's a great repository of knowledge, even in traditional Hadithanism and Judaism. These men have collected wisdom over the years, wise men who have existed, who have more or less followed God, with, of course, deviations notwithstanding, but there is a repository of knowledge within these traditions. That's why they've existed for so long. That's why they've survived. But continuing forward, his creed is just empty words. So the guy who says he's a Christian or Muslim but doesn't really follow it. His creed is just empty words. 1 or 2 days a year in church when either a loved one dies or somebody gets married. His doctrine amounts to nothing more than ceremony and rite without the spirit. The castrated intellectual is a strange case indeed, because despite being objectively speaking a loser in every other avenue of life, he nevertheless feels himself to be smart due to the fact that he engages in academic discipline. However, like I said before, the knowledge he gains is impotent. Never does he apply anything he has quote-unquote learned into his life in order to create real powerful change. Instead, he just seeks the novelty and entertainment associated with talking about things that other people do not understand. All of the academics give him a fictional realm where he feels dominant by using difficult terminology that most men and women can't follow, which helps him cope with the pain of a life that he has spent being dominated by other men in every other field, such as attracting women, winning in sports, and being respected by other men. What the castrated intellectual has missed is that true intelligence is holistic. Wisdom, knowledge, intellect, or whatever else you want to call it, are all inseparably bound to the lifestyle of the man who preaches it. A morbidly obese man can never truly be wise, in the same way that a sexually immoral man cannot be wise, nor can a man who lets his wife wear the pants in the relationship be wise in any real sense of the word. All of these men can talk all they want about philosophy, sociology, psychology, theology, or any other field of study, but it means nothing in the end. What has all of their studying produced? What is the fruit of their intellectual labor, which other people would find impressive and make them feel compelled to learn under their expertise? Not a single thing whatsoever. Wisdom isn't talked about. It isn't just preached. It is lived, practiced, and displayed consistently in the wise man's life. That is what gives the preaching its potency, when the words which are uttered proceed from a place of integrity. So, people like Sam, when he says those things that he does online, he says them from a state of integrity, right? He practices the things he preaches. Brother Sai practices the things he preaches. When I tell you about following the doctrine of God and remaining righteous and upright, God knows very well that I follow the things I preach, ladies and gentlemen. It comes from a place of integrity. That is where true wisdom lies, okay? Continuing with the reading. The wise man, as a prerequisite, must be in shape, or at the very least in the process of getting in shape, must be good at dealing with people, must be a risk taker, must have a healthy diet, and must have a transcendental creed which he holds himself accountable towards, to even have that flattering adjective ascribed to him, because all of those qualities are indicators that he lives a productive, generate life, not degenerate, generate. They show that the philosophy he practices and preaches actually produces character traits like temperance, discipline, compassion, virtue, courage, and strength, all things that make him successful in the life of this world. Simply put, why would you ever want to take life advice from a man you fundamentally do not want to live like or even look like? And by the way, when I say you don't want to look like them, I'm not talking about their negative canthal tilt or some black pill analysis or the fact that they have blonde hair or they're balding. I'm talking about like things that you can control. Like, I don't want to look like a fat man, not for his, blue eyes or his whatever looks. I'm talking about specifically what he has done to his body. He has neglected his body, and I do not want to look like him. The looks that indicate a lack of discipline and a weak and pathetic character. That's what I'm talking about here. So I'm not, being vain about it. I'm talking about the things that a man can control by God's leave. So continuing on. Simply put, why would you ever want to take life advice from a man you fundamentally do not want to live like or even look like? Or worded even more rudimentary than that, what in the world are you doing teaching other people when you haven't figured out your own life? This is what separates the man of true knowledge and understanding from the castrated intellectual. One is a seeker, a doer, an implementer, while the other is a self-flatterer, a talker, a trifle seeker, and an avid mental masturbator. Yet despite his severe personal shortcomings that reflect on his clear lack of wisdom, the Western world seems to really love the castrated intellectual, and even promotes his archetype by giving such weak men an artificial world in which they can thrive, called post-secondary education. The castrated intellectual does really well in university environments, making mom and dad proud, often getting good grades, and usually goes on to occupy the office of professor, be it of philosophy, sociology, political science, theology, or any other subject. These feeble, castrated intellectual, failed men are practically everywhere and stand in front of classrooms filled with young men and women, ready to teach them what is true and what is not. It is among the greatest embarrassments that continue in Western nations. One of the best litmus tests I have found to ascertain whether you're dealing with a really, and by the way, just to quickly cut in again, this is the dominant characteristic in universities among the students And the professors, you're going to find that they're castrated intellectuals everywhere, not truly wise men, because like I said, wisdom is holistic. It reflects in the life of the person. It's not just spoken about. It's not just heady. It's not just mental. It's lived and adopted. So again, one of the best litmus tests I have found to ascertain whether you are dealing with a really wise professor or just a castrated intellectual in a teacher's desk is to ask yourself the question, do I want to live my life like this man? Does his great example inspire me to improve myself in my own personal life? Does he live in a truly extraordinary way? If the answer is no, then you are almost always dealing definitely with a castrated intellectual. Although I have used men as a primary example of this archetype, by no means is the castrated intellectual syndrome only applicable to us. Women will do this as well. Female professors also exist, a silly concept to think of, which I suppose we can call infertile intellectuals. Their mark is often being unmarried with no children, an overweight figure, having hair dyed multiple colors or partially shaved off, and a tendency to be insufferably tyrannical teachers. So these female professors, they're castrated intellectuals as well. Although the term I have applied to them is infertile intellectuals. They do the same thing as well, just seeking amusement and entertainment through academics, but not really practicing wisdom in their lives. A true or righteous believing woman who is a wife and a mother and reads the scriptures, prays to God, fasts consistently, that's a true wise man. That's not a wise man. That is a truly wise woman. That is not infertile intellectual. That is a truly wise woman. But these female professors that sit in university desks, they're utterly infertile intellectuals, which is the female version of a castrated intellectual. So continuing on. It is an even greater embarrassment in Western nations than even the castrated intellectual professor phenomenon that such infertile intellectual female teachers will stand before a room filled with young men in the prime of their youth, teaching them what she thinks is real and what is not. It is absolutely pathetic. So you have these infertile intellectual female teachers, they sit in a room filled with young men, telling them about the world, telling them what is true and not, telling them what is right and wrong. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. That shows you that university is not really built upon true education and holistic intelligence. Continuing with reading. What I support here is neither end of these extremes. I do not see the castrated intellectual or his female counterpart, the infertile intellectual, as a standard for how people should be. But I also just as equally abhor the stereotypical jock or Chad or Stacy, to use internet slang, who perhaps is physically well endowed but lacks temperance. Both of these are an aberration from true strong masculinity. So I'm not promoting the castrated intellectual, the infertile intellectual, nor am I promoting the dumb high school jock who's physically strong, or the Stacy who maybe has a certain physical constitution to her, a very feminine form, but they're dumb. I'm not promoting either of these extremes. The model of manhood which I promote, I will call the intellectual warrior. The intellectual warrior is a strong, courageous, morally upright, capable man who takes care of himself, is disciplined, is in shape, eats well, and fasts regularly. A family man who fulfills all of his God-given duties for which his wife and children truly respect him in the bottom of their hearts. His physical and mental fortitude do not, however, come with a compromise on his intellect, as the intellectual warrior is intensely studious. He studies and reads the scriptures regularly, contemplates, self-reflects on his own shortcomings and how to rectify them, and is overall well-versed in the Word of God. He frequently exercises his mental faculties towards the Holy Writ, which sharpens him further every day. The intellectual warrior is a courageous man who doesn't shy away from risk, at least risks that are worth taking, but confronts them head on, having faith and trust in the divine, or in other words, God. He lets not the seemingly dire circumstances of the outside world cause him to worry, because he knows that ultimately his fate has nothing to do with the outside world, but everything to do with what God has ordained for him. If the Almighty is on his side, he can overcome 1,000 men in battle. If the Almighty is against him, then he holds no chance against even the most trivial of opponents, like a rabbit, a squirrel, or even a mouse, if God decrees for the creature to win and not him. This understanding makes the intellectual warrior not concerned with making the outside world less dangerous or waiting around idly for things to be safer, but instead he focuses on winning the favor of the Most High in order to secure his victory. His fate is not determined by what surrounds him, but instead is determined by what is above, which is God, and what is within, which is his own heart. He is almost indifferent to the world and solely focused on the divine, which he understands to be the true and only determiner of where he ends up. The intellectual warrior is a man of integrity, guided by deep faith, and sincerely holds himself accountable to an ideology higher than himself. This goes back to what I just said about him not really being concerned with the world around him, as he knows the true battle which determines everything else is within himself for his own soul. He draws upon an ancient, time-tested wisdom that directs his footsteps, which he knows all too well would deviate if he was left to follow his own devices with no guidance from the past. So that's what we do, ladies and gentlemen. We draw upon an ancient tradition from the ancient world, an old tradition, which is a tremendous tradition. We don't walk with our own wicked heart and our own desires and our own footsteps. We walk according to the guidance God has given us, because we know if we didn't, we would deviate, ladies and gentlemen. We would deviate. I would deviate. You would deviate. We would all fall away from the straight course if we followed our own desires. That is why we follow the scriptures. Our way of life comes from the past. It has been tested and proven. It's not our own wishes and fancy. Continuing with the reading. This here is the difference between the intellectual warrior and the castrated intellectual. The intellectual warrior is a down-to-earth, practical man in both body and spirit, whereas the castrated intellectual, although being a man in form, nevertheless has not yet grown into his manhood mentally and spiritually. So, why do I bring these two examples up? What is the purpose of the illustration? Well, it is to answer the question I previously asked of what kind of people make quote-unquote sense of all of the madness. Who are the people that make evident falsehood seem like fact with their backwards convoluted theories? It is none other than the castrated intellectual. He is the one who creates political frameworks for democracy. He is the one who produces social theories of why men and women are equal. He is the one who puts together frameworks in which sodomy is a normal part of human sexuality. He is the one who fabricates abnormal theories on what truly confers personhood in order to make abortion seem like anything but murder. The castrated intellectual is the one who attempts to rationalize the blatantly irrational. He has all of this brain horsepower, having the ability to read books, write structured essays, and teach in a classroom, yet at the same time no wisdom to temper that overactive brain. He possesses a wide open mind, capable of fitting in lots of information, but sadly the filter system does not work, so what he ends up with is just a, proverbially speaking, filthy tank between his temples. So this is the majority of university professors and university goers and students that you see. They're not dumb in the sense of like the high school jock. They have the ability to compute large amounts of information. They're intellectual in some way. They have the brain power, but they don't have the wisdom to temper it. So their intellect goes on to destroy themselves. This is the atheist. This is the guy who reads all these books on evolution and the history of the universe insofar as how quote-unquote science describes it with the Big Bang and stuff. He's an academic. He's not dumb in the traditional sense of the word. He's not a brickhead, but he doesn't have any wisdom to temper his intellect, so his intellect goes on to destroy him. Continuing on with the example I was giving of how his mind is just wide open, like a filthy tank, lots of information, but no organization. A large living space is great and all, but what happens to it when there is no organization, no cleanliness, and no standard for what is brought inside? You just end up with a big, cluttered house filled with nonsense, which resembles more of a junkyard than it does a place of residence. All of that extra real estate becomes more of a burden than anything else when it gets filled with a bunch of useless garbage. That is essentially the mental state of the castrated intellectual in regards to the information that enters his mind. It is these same castrated intellectuals that create theoretical frameworks for errant nonsense that have produced and ardently defended the globe model. When you go down the line of history, you will see a certain type of character invariably recurring when it comes to globe apologetics. He is a highly religious, mystical, superstitious, math-obsessed, metaphysics-obsessed, castrated intellectual philosopher. The reason why these kinds of men are the church fathers of heliocentric and globe earth cosmology is because the spherical model of the earth is totally convoluted, insolubly complex, and an utterly counterintuitive paradigm that no normal person could possibly understand. Okay? Nobody understands the globe, okay? It's utter nonsense, complete metaphysics, speculation, mental masturbation, intellectual castration. It's not real, practical, empirical science. It's just laden with baseless assumptions. Once again, I am not saying that well-adjusted, smart people have put together the globe. This is a very different type of person I am talking about here, which is responsible for the current cosmology. One who certainly has the ability to think deeply, but albeit not the ability to think properly. These two quotes that are ascribed to the legendary and controversial Nikola Tesla capture what I am attempting to relay to you perfectly. So these are two quotes from Nikola Tesla, and this is exactly what I'm talking about here. So first quote is, "The scientists of today think deeply instead of clearly. One must be sane to think clearly, but one can think deeply and be quite insane." And perhaps even more relevant, quote, "Today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality." End quote. What a fine way to begin our analysis of the history of the globe. These two quotes summarize the lesson beautifully, that the spheroidal Earth cosmology has been put together by insane men who think deeply instead of clearly, and who have substituted mathematics for experiments, wandering through equation after equation, eventually building a structure which has no relation to reality. Here, Tesla is speaking of exactly the same type of person which I have described in the preceding pages and given a name, the castrated intellectual. Intelligence, and by intelligence I mean brain horsepower, is not a virtue in and of itself, my dear reader. Towards what activities have you applied that robust mind? Did you use it for good or for creating a great evil? Was that ability which God has given you to be able to interface with difficult and abstract concepts with more than the average person spent in furthering a righteous cause? Or was that big, overinflated head that sits on your shoulders spent mentally masturbating to falsehoods all day long? These questions, and I emphasize this, my reader, these questions are the determiner of the objective value of any given individual's capability for intelligence. A university professor, a computer programmer, an architect, or a scientist is not a dumb person. They are certainly able to intellectually labor, perhaps more so than even you and I in some cases. But is their intellect guided by wisdom? That is the million-dollar question. If any of these aforementioned men, so the university professor, computer programmer, architect, scientist, etc., if any of these aforementioned men are atheists, liberals, progressivists, modernists, or deniers of God and the scriptures, which they very well could be and often are, then that crucially important component of wisdom is not present in their lives. If we were to isolate these two variables of intellect, and by intellect I mean the ability for the brain to compute large quantities of difficult information, and wisdom, by wisdom I mean the ability to know basic things like what is right, what is wrong, what is natural, and what is not, i.e. the skill of knowing the obvious, I would definitely say that the latter, wisdom, is far more important than the former, intellect. Of course, it is wonderful to have both, but if I had to just pick one for myself in neglect of the other, I would choose wisdom over intellect any day of the week. I would choose wisdom because I don't want to become a castrated intellectual. The simple man in the desert of Sindh, Pakistan, who does not understand all of these abstract theories, philosophies, or world religions, but still follows the commandments of God, has a family who he is dutiful to, and overall just leads an organic way of life, not at war with his own nature, is far better off than the atheist computer geek who has his mind filled with all of this extra information, which has not even been encountered by the Sindhi man, but is totally in opposition to the natural world, including himself. The atheist computer geek's quote-unquote intelligence eventually becomes a curse upon him. They are the chains that keep his oversized head bound to the floor, due again to the lack of wisdom. Quality over quantity when it comes to information, my dear reader. That is the lesson we all must learn. A man like myself, who eats one quality meal a day consisting of rice, vegetables, beans, fruits, nuts, and raw fish, and spends most of the hours fasting, would, by God's leave, be in a much more healthier state than the 350-pound, 6'6" man with a voracious appetite who shovels McDonald's and Wendy's down his throat as if his stomach were a garbage compactor. The big guy may take in more quantities of food than me, but who is better off in the end? Once more, quality over quantity is the motto. So that's the end of the reading there. And again, I'm trying to explain that the people who have promoted the globe and the people who have founded the globe model, Pythagoras, Plato, Parmenides. I go on to explain this in this section, which God willing you will read when the book is complete. These are all castrated intellectuals. They're not men of true wisdom. They don't practice true wisdom. They don't understand what true wisdom is. And the same tradition exists today in the university. The same people promoting the globe. All these atheist scumbags on the internet like Red's Rhetoric and Sly Sparkane, Wolfie 6020, I don't even know his online name. All these guys online, Team Skeptic, many of which they don't even show their face online. They're just like nameless, faceless avatars with fake names on the internet. They spread their garbage, they spread their vile, they're vicious against flat earthers. These people are all just castrated intellectuals. There's no wisdom in their lives. You can hear how they speak. They're wicked, untempered men. And that is the history of the globe. These are the people that have founded it, not empirical, wise, intelligent physical scientists. So that is the end of the reading, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum, men. My name is Walid Naeem, and I have dedicated my entire life towards spreading the truth about the words of God. And I don't know about you, but personally, I have grown sick and tired of all these mainstream religions, and specifically the mosques, which have utterly failed us. I'm fed up with them placing the words of man, specifically their fabricated hadiths, at a higher authority than God's holy scriptures, their lack of knowledge about conspiracy facts and realpolitik, and their complete ignorance of the true nature of our earth. I've had enough of their compromise, their weakness, their lame sermons which put people to sleep, their virtue signaling, their fear of facing any real persecution, and their willingness to let the quote-unquote secular atheist utterly trample over them. The atheists own all of the educational boards and teach their propaganda to every so-called Muslim and quote-unquote non-Muslim child here in the West. And now with the Toyota Corolla hoax, the atheist has successfully broken apart our communities and made us utter slaves to their government. Our so-called quote-unquote Muslim sons are a bunch of wannabe hood rat gangsters who vape, drink, smoke weed, and party like animals. And our so-called quote-unquote Muslim daughters are not much different. They have no interest in hearing about the word of God. They are all too busy YOLOing. This has all happened while the imams have been living very comfortably off of the hard-earned money of their community members in the donation bins. As stated before, I personally am completely fed up with this. The mosques have had all of the support, funding, enfranchisement, and time of our communities and have produced absolutely nothing. The atheist has made the so-called quote-unquote Muslim man his bitch. He has steamrolled him in every way possible. That is why I created Eyes Wide Open. This channel exists as a call to action for all of those strong believing men who trust in their Lord fully and refuse to compromise the Quran. It is time the true sons of Adam and the inheritors of the tremendous tradition, in other words, the true Quranic Muslims, to set up something for themselves and fearlessly stand up against the madness that is going on in the world. What you see with my channel right now is only the beginning. These short videos I make in my car are all that I have time for right now, working a full-time job. I scribble these together while at work and make these videos while running errands. But you ain't seen nothing yet. If God should will, I have so much more in store for Eyes Wide Open. I want this to be a platform for the believers. Just a couple of things I have planned for this channel is, firstly, creating scholarly books, documentaries, and essays to arm you guys with the intellectual firepower for dealing with all of our enemies. Secondly, I would like Eyes Wide Open to be a center for heavy activism, public and street preaching, going to City Hall, organizing protests, knocking doors, going to baseball, hockey, soccer, basketball, and other major sporting events and preaching to the people leaving the stadium, going to the totally failed mosques, synagogues, and churches and debating with their religious leaders, going to universities and debating the quote-unquote secular professors on their laughable so-called science, and much more. It's time the believers start to fight back and shake the cage of this disgusting system. My goal is to create a base for the believers. I want people to know of our name, that there are dedicated, zealous, and studious men who do not compromise the word of God, and we are ready to take action. If we keep waiting for our mosque to do something about the real problems of this world, then we will be waiting until Judgment Day. We need to create something now from the ground up. With that being said, may God bless us in all of our endeavors and guide us every step of the way. If this sounds like something you are interested in, and if you want to be a part of the movement, then you can help me out. My Patreon and PayPal are linked in the description of every video, and, God willing, if enough generous believers decide to fund this platform, then I can quit my full-time job and look for something part-time, or, even better than that, leave employment completely, which will give me more hours in the day to do this work. I do not care to be rich. All of that stuff is vanity anyways. But the fact of the matter is, my wife and I need to eat and have a roof over our heads. So, if you wish to support the cause, then I thank you sincerely for that and promise to fight with might and main in the cause of God for the believers. If you are not able to, hey, then I totally understand. Find somebody else who needs that money and give it to them. Give it out of fear of your Lord and in dread of that great and terrible day, which is coming to all of us. For all of the believers out there, the brothers and sisters who follow hard upon the truth, all I can say is much love to each and every one of you. May God reward you in this life and the hereafter. Praise goes to God alone. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Peace.